Hi everyone, my name is Adrien, and today I'll be presenting task analysis and the tool I'm using, Tagfl, which is a way to generate task analysis graphs from Lisp. So hopefully by the end of this discussion, you'll have a better understanding of what task analysis are, what they can be used for, and how they can maybe benefit your project. I have to warn you, I'm more into, have a background in UX design, and Clojure for me was kind of a new programming language that I found very interesting, and immediately tried to find ways to include this in my day-to-day work. And so, well, then let's start with the definition. So what are task analysis? Well, it refers to the broad practice of learning how users work and how they perform in order to achieve their goals. So yeah, this is a broad definition, but in the essence is all the things you can put in place to really go through the understanding of what your users are going to do and how they're achieving this. So yeah, the problem is trying to understand users. And why? Well, because technology may change rapidly, but people, they change slowly. So the principles of the design really comes from, well, the understanding of the people. And that will remain always true. This is from Don Norman, one of the main figures on UX field research. So keep in mind that all the tools that we are building and trying to improve on, well, you always have to take into consideration how we can also think about improving the understanding of the end users. So let's dive in. An example of a task analysis would be something basic like this. So how do you make tea? To make tea, well, you need several subtasks. Well, you need first to boil the water, to empty the pot, and so on. And how do you boil water? Well, to boil water, you will fill the kettle, you light the stove, and so on. So this is really a simple example, but you get a sense that the lower you go, the more you will answer the question of how you're doing things, and the higher you go, the more you will answer the question of why you're doing them. And this is a really compact and really refined way to communicate on user context and the goal they're trying to achieve. Yeah, this is in the essence task analysis. But they can be used for interesting things. For instance, they already provide some context of maybe some issues. So for instance, a very interesting example is when you're trying to withdraw money from the ATM, there have several steps involved. You have to insert the bank card, type the PIN code, select the amount to withdraw, and so on. And then you have to take the money and the card. But by looking at this graph, you already know there's an issue, because if you understand user psychology, you know that as soon as they reach their end goal, they won't take care or consider anything else. So meaning that as soon as people have the money, they will forget about taking the card, which is the last step on this graph. So I already know that there's a mistake here. And a good ATM design would actually be correcting this and have this in place. So first you need to take the card, and then you withdraw the money. So this is already a way to focus and understand how you can improve on the sequence of tasks for the users. But there are other benefits. But it depends on the perspective you take. For instance, well, designers obviously need task analysis in order to assess their job and to really have a clear understanding of what the user is trying to achieve. And for this, so they have a reason and they go through all the steps, and this way they have a clear understanding of what they have to build a mock-up for, and they can have a clear understanding. This is kind of a checklist for them in the end. It's also a keen way to understand how all the tasks can be considered in terms of numbers of operation, efficiency, and so on. Well, this is very technical, but it's more for the designer. Another perspective is from the product owner, where maybe he wants to actually refer to some design decisions that he has to do for the product and sharing his vision on something. If he has a clearer or a much easier way to refer to these design decisions, well, maybe this will be helpful to communicate better with all the teams involved. And finally, because I think UX is not just a one-person team job, it's actually the responsible for all the person involved in the project. Developers also have an interest maybe in task analysis, because as soon as you understand the user context of why you're doing this specific feature, then you can actually make micro decisions. And I think developers today are making more and more micro decisions that are related to design. So, in the end, how we can help them? Well, we can try to provide them with a user context so that they know that for this user, they might need to do this. So I won't bother making a team meeting and trying to settle this question. I already know the right answer based on this. So how it's done? Actually, task analysis are done more by user research, where you gather information and try to understand all the processes that are involved and by observing. So it's quite a tedious process. Well, you have to write a lot of notes and try to go back and then make a huge synthesis of all this information. It's a bit cumbersome, and the tools existing are not really there. I think they fall into two categories. One would be more about freedom, like using a regular design toolkit such as Figma that will provide some tiny elements to build task analysis, which is great. You have a tool to enable to make the graphs. But in the end, it's not really very efficient, because every time you have to move around and make updates on the task analysis, it will be a bit cumbersome. A next tool, which will be more known for people working with fail-safe system, and to fully understand the options for someone who is trying to build a task and to make sure that he always has an opportunity. Well, they had constraints, and this is an example of another type of task analysis, which is called HAMSTER. Both of the tools are great, but they don't allow for quick iteration and updates. So how can we improve on this? Well, one way is to try to have maybe a text-based solution so that we can version it in Git and try to maybe lie the essence of this task analysis inside the code, and having, for instance, in the architecture with components, as well, the context of why we would need this. Another aspect is like, I really enjoy the REPL and using this dynamic environment and quick response. Then I think it's also a good idea to try to include this aspect into such a tool. And the final solution should be trying to be adapted to the flow information. So as I said, trying to build task analysis requires to synthesize a lot of different pieces of information, and you don't get the full picture just at once. You only have a small segments where you have to work on one subtask and then another one and then combine them. So if you have a tool that allows you to just focus on these sub-elements, it will be a bit easier to process. Here we have the setup and a brief example of the example I've shown about how to withdraw money. And if we run this, we have actually the full task analysis written. But as I mentioned, I'm just focusing on the key elements here, the first step. But if we go a bit deeper and we have, for instance, information later on the sub-elements, then I can just work on these and make it appear again. So this way I can actually build this task analysis just by focusing on S expression that represents the partial piece of truth that I'm working with when I'm dealing with end users. And the interesting thing also is that it can be, so as I mentioned, these are very simple task analysis, but they can have all the flavors. I mentioned about HAMSTER, and since it's the same graph behind, you can actually change the policy of rendering, which will then create a completely different graph, but might be useful to, if you're talking about, other UX designer, they might be more interested in the sequence and the other aspects, and this makes more sense for them. Whereas the other one will be maybe preferable for teamwork or, speaking with other people. So I tried to have some feedbacks, but other designers are not very happy with the Lisp syntax and trying to interact with this. So they immediately told me that, well, you need to improve on the interactions. But they were really happy with other type of task analysis that were included in this first demo. So this is very encouraging. They also suggested that we can do actually task simulation, meaning that we can render the graph and associate for each task maybe a time associated to them, so that to maybe fully understand how long it takes, or the difference of if we just have the static image. Well, thank you. I just like for you to take away that to keep really in mind to have the user's need when you're designing. And I think task analysis is a way I don't know sure if you can really push this, but at least you know there's one tool that can be helpful to quickly generate this. Thank you.